My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 42 years old, and I thought I knew everything about betrayal. I was wrong. What I discovered about my husband, my marriage, and my own children will haunt me forever. But here's the thing about secrets. They have a way of connecting in ways you never expect. Stay until the end, because what happened at that family dinner changed everything, and I mean everything. The truth I uncovered didn't just destroy one life. It unraveled an entire web of lies that had been spinning for years. Let me paint you a picture of what I thought was my perfect life. 15 years married to David Mitchell, a successful real estate developer. 2 beautiful children, Emma, our 14-year-old daughter, and little Jake, who just turned 8. We lived in a gorgeous colonial house in Westchester County, complete with the white picket fence and golden retriever named Max. David was everything a woman could want in a husband. Tall, dark hair with just the right amount of silver at the temples, successful, charming at dinner parties. He coached Jake's little league team and never missed Emma's school plays. Every anniversary, he'd surprise me with a weekend getaway to some romantic destination. On paper, we were the American dream. But papers can lie. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a Tuesday morning in October. I was doing laundry, that mundane task that somehow reveals the biggest secrets. In David's pants pocket, I found a receipt from a restaurant I'd never heard of. Chez Laurent, an expensive French place in Manhattan. The date was 3 weeks ago, October 15th. The total was $347 for 2 people. I stood there in our laundry room, staring at this piece of paper. October 15th. I remembered that night clearly because David had called to say he was working late on the Henderson property deal. He'd come home at nearly midnight, claiming he'd grabbed a quick sandwich at his desk, a $347 sandwich, at a French restaurant for 2 people. My hands started shaking. Not the dramatic, movie-style shaking, just that subtle tremor you get when your body knows something your mind isn't ready to accept. I stuffed the receipt into a jewelry box underneath my grandmother's pearl necklace. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because throwing it away would make it disappear, and disappearing evidence doesn't make the truth go away. Over the next few weeks, I became a detective in my own home. I started noticing things I'd overlooked before. The way David's phone was always face down on the table. How he'd suddenly developed a passion for evening jogs that kept him out for hours. The new cologne that appeared in our bathroom, something expensive and musky that he claimed was for client meetings. Then there were the physical changes. David had always been in decent shape, but suddenly he was hitting the gym every morning at 5 a.m. His wardrobe upgraded overnight. New suits, expensive shirts, even his underwear was suddenly designer brands. When I complimented his new look, he'd shrug and say something about wanting to stay competitive in the market. But the real tell was how he looked at me. Or rather, how he didn't look at me. 15 years of marriage teaches you someone's eyes. David used to look at me like I was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. Now, when he looked at me at all, it was like he was trying to solve a math problem he didn't particularly care about solving. The turning point came on November 3rd. I remember the date because it was Emma's school play. She was starring as Emily in Our Town. David had promised to be there, front row center, with his camera ready. But 20 minutes before curtain, he texted, "Emergency at work. So sorry. Tell Emma I love her and I'll watch the video." I sat in that auditorium, surrounded by other families, watching my daughter deliver her lines with such passion and grace. She kept looking out into the audience, searching for her father's face. During intermission, she found me in the lobby. "Where's Dad?" she asked, and the disappointment in her voice was like a knife between my ribs. "Work emergency, sweetheart. You know how important his job is." She nodded, but I saw the hurt flicker across her face before she masked it with a smile. "It's okay, Mom. Thanks for being here." That night, while David was having his mysterious work emergency, I sat in bed with my laptop. I'm not proud of what I did next, but desperation makes you do things you never thought you would. I logged into our cell phone account online. I told myself I was just checking our data usage, maybe seeing if we needed to upgrade our plan. But that wasn't what I was really doing. David's call log was like reading a foreign language at first. Lots of numbers I recognized. His office, clients, his brother Mark, but there was one number that appeared with startling frequency, sometimes 3 or 4 calls a day. The calls were never long during business hours, just a minute or two, but in the evenings they stretched on for 30-45 minutes. I grabbed a pen and paper and wrote down the number. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was different. This time it was anger mixing with the fear. The next morning, after David left for his 5 a.m. gym session, I called the number. It rang twice before a woman's voice answered. Hello? I hung up immediately, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. It was a voice I recognized, though I couldn't place it immediately. Soft, with just a hint of a southern accent. Familiar in a way that made my stomach churn. I spent the rest of that day trying to place the voice. It haunted me through my morning meeting with a new client, through lunch with my sister, through helping Jake with his math homework. That voice saying just one word, but somehow I knew it was connected to everything that was falling apart in my life. That evening, David came home with flowers. Beautiful, white roses, my favorite. He kissed me on the cheek and asked about my day, just like he had for 15 years. But now I was listening to every word, watching every gesture, looking for the lie underneath the performance. How was the Henderson deal today? I asked as we sat down to dinner. Oh, you know how it is. Lots of back and forth with the lawyers. Boring stuff. He cut into his steak with practiced precision. How was your day, honey? Fine. Quiet. I called a wrong number this morning and got the strangest feeling I knew the woman who answered. David's knife paused for just a split second. Just a split second, but I caught it. Oh? What kind of feeling? I can't place it. You know how sometimes a voice just sounds familiar? It's been bothering me all day. David took a sip of wine. Maybe it was someone from Emma's school? Or the grocery store? Maybe. Or maybe it was the woman my husband had been calling every single day for the past 3 months. That night, I lay awake listening to David's breathing beside me. He'd fallen asleep easily, the way innocent people do. But I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing through possibilities, each one worse than the last. The voice belonged to someone I knew. I was certain of it now. But who? And how long had David been lying to me? The receipt was from 3 weeks ago, but the phone calls had been going on for months. How long had I been living in this beautiful lie? I thought about Emma, scanning the audience for her father's face. I thought about Jake, so proud when David helped him hit his first home run last summer. I thought about our anniversary trip to Napa just 6 months ago, where David had told me I was still the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. Had that been a lie too? How much of our life together was real? And how much was just David playing the role of devoted husband while his heart and mind were somewhere else entirely? The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out who owned that voice, and I was going to discover just how deep this betrayal went. I had no idea that what I was about to uncover would be so much worse than a simple affair. I had no idea that the voice belonged to someone who had been at our wedding, who had held my children as babies, who had sat at our dinner table countless times sharing family stories and making us all laugh. I had no idea that the betrayal went back further than I could have ever imagined, and that it would lead me to question everything I thought I knew about my own life. But I was about to find out. The voice haunted me for 3 days. I found myself replaying that single hello over and over in my mind, trying to match it to faces, to memories, to the women in my life. It wasn't my sister. Too soft. Not my mother-in-law. Wrong accent. Not any of the school moms I knew well. But it was someone close. I could feel it in my bones. On Friday morning, inspiration struck in the most mundane way possible. I was at the grocery store, standing in the produce section, when I heard someone laugh behind me. That same laugh I'd heard 1,000 times at family barbecues, birthday parties, Christmas dinners. I turned around, and there she was. Rebecca Chen, David's business partner's wife. We'd known each other for 8 years, ever since David had gone into business with her husband, Michael. She was selecting apples, looking perfectly normal, perfectly innocent. "Sarah!" She smiled brightly when she saw me. "How are you, honey?" And there it was. That voice, soft with just a hint of Southern accent from her college years in Georgia, the voice that had answered David's secret phone calls. "Rebecca, I managed to keep my voice steady. I'm fine. How are you?" We made small talk for a few minutes. She asked about the kids. I asked about her daughter who was away at college. Normal, friendly conversation between two women who had shared countless dinners and family gatherings. But underneath it all, I was studying her face, looking for signs of guilt, of deception. She looked the same as always. Rebecca had always been beautiful in an effortless way. Long black hair, delicate features, the kind of natural elegance that made other women feel simultaneously envious and protective. She was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, but somehow she made it look like a magazine cover. "We should do dinner soon," she said as we parted ways. The four of us like old times. "Absolutely," I replied, knowing there would never be old times again. That afternoon, I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot and called the number again. This time, I was ready. "Hello? Rebecca, it's Sarah Mitchell." There was a pause that lasted exactly 2 seconds too long. "Oh, Sarah, hi. I didn't recognize the number. It's my work phone. Listen, I was wondering if you wanted to grab coffee next week? Just the two of us. It's been forever since we had girl time." Another pause. "That sounds lovely. Let me check my schedule and get back to you?" Of course, no rush. I hung up and sat there, my heart pounding. The pauses told me everything I needed to know. Rebecca knew exactly why I was calling. She knew I knew. That evening, I watched David more carefully than ever. When his phone buzzed during dinner, he glanced at it and then put it face down without responding. But not before I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen. Rebecca. After dinner, David announced he was going for his evening jog. "Might be a long one tonight," he said, kissing the top of my head. "Need to clear my head about this new project." I waited exactly 10 minutes after he left. Then I got in my car and followed him. David didn't go to the jogging trail near our house. Instead, he drove across town to a small park I'd never been to. I parked across the street and watched as he got out of his car and sat on a bench. Within 5 minutes, another car pulled up. Rebecca's silver BMW. I watched her get out and walk toward him. Even from a distance, I could see the familiarity in their movements. This wasn't their first meeting. This wasn't even their 100th meeting. They sat on that bench like two people who had been sitting together for a very long time. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I could see their body language. David's hand on her knee. Rebecca leaning into his shoulder. At one point, she turned and kissed him, and it wasn't the quick peck of friends greeting each other. It was the kiss of lovers who had been apart too long. I sat in my car, watching my husband kiss another woman, and I felt something inside me break. Not just break, shatter into a million pieces that I knew I'd never be able to put back together the same way. But alongside the heartbreak came something else. Rage. Pure, white-hot rage. David and Rebecca weren't just having an affair. They were having an affair with each other's spouses watching. Michael was David's business partner. We were all friends. We'd all been to each other's houses, celebrated holidays together, shared intimate family moments. How long had this been going on? How many times had I hugged Rebecca at parties while she was sleeping with my husband? How many times had Michael and David shaken hands over business deals while David was betraying him with his wife? I drove home in a daze, arriving just minutes before David returned from his jog. He came in sweaty and breathing hard, selling the performance perfectly. "Good run?" I asked. "Great. Really cleared my head." He headed toward the shower. "I think I've got a solution for the Henderson property issue." I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and demand to know how he could look me in the eye and lie so effortlessly. Instead, I smiled and said, "That's wonderful, honey." That night, I lay in bed next to my husband and planned my revenge. But first, I needed to know how deep this went. The phone calls had been going on for months, but how long had the affair been happening? And more importantly, was there anything else I didn't know? The next morning, while David was at his Saturday golf game, or so he claimed, I did something I never thought I would do. I searched our house like a detective looking for evidence. I started with his office. David was meticulous about his workspace, everything in its place. But people having affairs get careless eventually. They start taking risks. In the back of his desk drawer, underneath a stack of old business cards, I found a hotel receipt. The Grand Regency, Manhattan. A suite for 2 nights in September. The same weekend, David had told me he was going to a real estate conference in Boston. Then I found the credit card statements he'd been hiding. Charges at expensive restaurants, lingerie stores, jewelry shops. Thousands of dollars spent on someone who wasn't his wife. But the worst discovery was in his jacket pocket. A small velvet box, the kind that holds jewelry. Inside was a beautiful diamond necklace, delicate and expensive. There was a card tucked underneath. For my darling Rebecca, you make me feel alive again. Forever yours, D. I sat on our bedroom floor, holding this necklace that was meant for another woman, and I realized something that changed everything. This wasn't just sex. This wasn't just a midlife crisis fling. David was in love with Rebecca. Really, truly in love in a way that made our 15-year marriage look like a consolation prize. But there was something else bothering me, something that went beyond the affair. As I pieced together the timeline, I realized that the phone calls had started in early August. Jake's 8th birthday was August 10th. We'd had a big family party, and Rebecca and Michael had been there. I went to the photo albums and found the pictures from that day. There was Jake, blowing out his candles. There was David, standing behind him with his hands on Jake's shoulders. And there was Rebecca, smiling at the camera, but her eyes were on David. That's when the terrible thought crept into my mind. The thought that would lead me to make the decision that would destroy everything. Jake had always looked different from Emma and David. Emma was clearly David's daughter. She had his dark hair, his green eyes, his stubborn chin. But Jake was blonde and blue-eyed, with delicate features that reminded me of... No. I pushed the thought away. That was impossible. Crazy. Jake was David's son. He had to be. But as I stared at the photo, I couldn't stop myself from seeing the resemblance between Jake and Michael Chen. The same blonde hair, the same blue eyes, the same gentle smile. Michael and Rebecca had been married for 12 years, but they'd never had children together. Rebecca had always said she was focusing on her career. Maybe they'd have kids later. But what if there had been a child? What if that child was living in my house, calling my husband Daddy? The room started spinning. I had to sit down on the bed and put my head between my knees. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. But as I thought about it more, pieces started falling into place. The way Rebecca had always been especially affectionate with Jake at family gatherings, how she'd volunteered to babysit him when he was little, always insisting it was no trouble, how she knew exactly what he liked and didn't like, what made him laugh, what scared him. And David. Now I was remembering things differently. How he'd been distant during my pregnancy with Jake. How he'd seemed almost surprised when Jake was born. How he'd never bonded with Jake the way he had with Emma. I thought about the timing. Jake was 8 years old. Rebecca and David could have been having an affair 9 years ago, before their current relationship started up again. Maybe it had never really ended. Maybe they'd just gotten better at hiding it. I needed to know the truth. All of it. But more than that, I needed to decide what I was going to do with the truth once I had it. That's when I started planning. Not just my revenge against David and Rebecca, but something bigger. Something that would expose every lie, every betrayal, every secret that had been festering in our perfect suburban lives. I was going to destroy the facade once and for all. But first, I needed proof, and I knew exactly how to get it. Getting the proof I needed required patience, planning, and a level of deception I didn't know I was capable of. But betrayal has a way of teaching you skills you never wanted to learn. The first step was the paternity test. I couldn't just walk into a lab with Jake and ask for DNA testing without raising questions. So I did what any desperate mother would do. I researched discrete paternity testing online until I found a lab that would accept samples I collected myself. Getting Jake's DNA was heartbreakingly easy. A few strands of hair from his brush, carefully placed in the provided envelope. David's was trickier, but I managed to collect saliva from his coffee cup one morning before he left for work. While I waited for the results, I continued my surveillance. I followed David 3 more times, always to the same park. always meeting Rebecca. Their routine was sickeningly predictable. They'd sit on the bench, talk for exactly 45 minutes, and then Rebecca would get in her car and leave first. David would wait 10 minutes before heading home. I also started paying closer attention to Michael. Poor, oblivious Michael, who had no idea his business partner was sleeping with his wife. Or did he? The more I watched him, the more I noticed subtle signs of strain. He looked tired, older than his 45 years. At the Halloween party the Chens hosted, I watched him watching Rebecca, and I saw something in his eyes that looked like suspicion. During that same party, I had a moment alone with Rebecca in her kitchen while she was refilling the wine glasses. "You have such a beautiful home," I said, looking around at her perfectly decorated space. "Thank you. Michael keeps saying we should downsize, but I love having room for entertaining. It must be nice having a space that's just yours and Michael's. No kids to mess things up." Rebecca's hand stilled on the wine bottle. "Yes, well, we've always been focused on our careers." "Do you ever regret not having children?" The question hung in the air between us. Rebecca looked at me, and for just a moment, her mask slipped. I saw pain there, and longing, and something that looked almost like guilt. "Sometimes," she said quietly. "But life doesn't always go according to plan, does it?" "No," I agreed. "It certainly doesn't." That night, David was more attentive than he'd been in months. He helped clean up after the party, complimented my costume, even suggested we watch a movie together. But I could see through the performance now. He was overcompensating, trying to assuage guilt he didn't even know I knew he should feel. "Rebecca seemed a little off tonight," I mentioned casually as we got ready for bed. "Did she? I didn't notice." "She was asking me about kids, whether I ever regretted having them." David's reflection in the bathroom mirror went very still. "That's an odd question." I thought so too, especially coming from someone who chose not to have children. Maybe she's reconsidering. It's not too late for her and Michael. The ease with which he lied was breathtaking. Even knowing what I knew, part of me was impressed by his performance. The paternity results arrived on a Tuesday. I was alone in the house when the FedEx truck pulled up. Emma was at school, Jake was at a friend's house, David was at work. I signed for the envelope with shaking hands. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the sealed envelope for 10 full minutes before I found the courage to open it. Inside were 2 sheets of paper, filled with scientific terminology I barely understood, but the conclusion was written in plain English. Based on the analysis of the submitted samples, David Mitchell is excluded as the biological father of Jake Mitchell. The probability of paternity is 0%. I read it 3 times before the words truly sank in. Jake wasn't David's son. My 8-year-old boy, with his blonde hair and blue eyes and gentle smile, was the product of an affair that had been going on for at least 9 years. But whose son was he? I needed Michael's DNA to confirm what I already suspected, but getting it would be more complicated. I couldn't very well follow him around collecting saliva samples. I needed a different approach. That's when I remembered that Michael was a wine collector. He had an impressive collection in his home office, and he was always eager to share rare bottles with friends. I called Rebecca and suggested that David and I stop by for dinner later that week. "I'd love to see Michael's new Bordeaux," I said. David's been wanting to expand his wine knowledge. Rebecca agreed, though I detected some reluctance in her voice. She probably didn't want to be around David and me together, not when she was sleeping with my husband. The dinner was torture. 4 adults sitting around a table, making pleasant conversation while lies and betrayals swirled beneath the surface. Rebecca was nervous, barely touching her food. David was performing the role of devoted husband and loyal business partner. Michael was oblivious, excited to show off his wine collection. After dinner, Michael brought out a bottle of 1996 Chateau Margaux. "This is a special occasion wine," he said, carefully decanting it. "But life's too short not to enjoy the good stuff with good friends." Good friends, if only he knew. We all tasted the wine, making appreciative noises. Michael and David discussed the tannins and the finish while Rebecca and I complimented the meal. Normal couples doing normal couple things. When Michael went to the kitchen to get cheese to pair with the wine, I slipped into his office and quickly swabbed the rim of his wine glass with a cotton swab. The DNA sample was secured in a small vial in my purse before he returned. A week later, I had my confirmation. Michael Chen was Jake's biological father. I sat in my car outside the lab where I'd picked up the results, reading the report over and over. The numbers didn't lie. The probability of paternity was 99.97%. My son, the boy I'd given birth to, raised, loved unconditionally for 8 years, was actually Michael's son, which meant Rebecca was his mother. Which meant that 9 years ago, while I thought I was happily married and planning a family, my husband was having an affair with his business partner's wife, and that affair had produced a child. My child. Except he wasn't really mine, was he? The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I couldn't even cry. I just sat there, numb, trying to understand how this had happened. How had Rebecca gotten pregnant with Michael's child and somehow convinced everyone, including me, that the baby was mine? Then I remembered. 9 years ago, Rebecca and I had been pregnant at the same time. She'd been about 3 months ahead of me. We joked about raising our babies together, about them being best friends. But Rebecca had lost her baby in the 3rd trimester. Or so we'd all been told. She'd been devastated, or had seemed to be. She'd taken time off work, barely left her house for weeks. Michael had been worried about her mental health. And when I'd gone into labor with Jake a few weeks early, Rebecca had been one of the first people to visit us in the hospital. She'd held Jake for hours that first day, tears streaming down her face. I thought she was emotional because holding him reminded her of her own loss. But now I understood. Those weren't tears of grief. They were tears of a mother holding her biological child for the first time since giving birth. But how? How had she switched the babies? How had she convinced the hospital, the doctors, everyone, that her living child had died? The more I thought about it, the more questions arose. Had David known? Had he been part of the plan? Or had Rebecca orchestrated everything herself? And what about Michael? Was he really as oblivious as he seemed? Or did he suspect something? I needed answers. But more than that, I needed justice. Rebecca and David had stolen 9 years of my life. They'd made me raise a child who wasn't mine, while his real mother watched from the sidelines, playing the role of family friend. They'd turned my entire existence into a lie. But I wasn't going to confront them privately. I wasn't going to give them a chance to spin another story, to gaslight me into thinking I was crazy or mistaken. I was going to expose them publicly, in front of everyone who mattered, and I knew exactly when and how I was going to do it. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. Every year, David and I hosted a big family dinner. Both sets of parents, my sister and her family, David's brother and his wife, and always Michael and Rebecca. 22 people gathered around our dining room table, giving thanks for family and friendship and all the blessings in our lives. This year's Thanksgiving was going to be different. This year, I was going to serve the truth as the main course. I spent those 3 weeks planning every detail. I ordered new DNA tests from a different lab, wanting multiple confirmations. I researched adoption lawyers and divorce attorneys. I opened my own bank account and started transferring money from our joint accounts. I collected evidence of David's affair: photos, receipts, credit card statements, copies of romantic texts I'd found on his phone. But most importantly, I planned the reveal. I wanted it to be devastating, undeniable, and public. I wanted everyone to see David and Rebecca for who they really were. I wanted to destroy their reputations, their relationships, their comfortable lives built on lies. I also made a decision about Jake. He was 8 years old, innocent in all of this. He didn't deserve to be traumatized by the truth, at least not yet. I would protect him as much as possible, even though he wasn't biologically mine. I'd been his mother for 8 years, and that meant something, even if the DNA said otherwise. 2 days before Thanksgiving, I got a call from Rebecca. "Sarah, I'm so sorry, but I don't think Michael and I are going to make it to dinner this year. He's been feeling under the weather." She was trying to get out of it. Maybe she sensed something. Or maybe she just couldn't bear to sit at our table and pretend everything was normal while she was sleeping with my husband. "Oh no," I said, injecting disappointment into my voice. "Is there anything I can do? I could bring you some soup." "That's sweet, but I think he just needs rest. Maybe we can do a makeup dinner next week?" Actually, I really need you both there. I have some important news to share with everyone, and it wouldn't be the same without our closest friends." There was a pause. "What kind of news?" "It's a surprise. Please, Rebecca. It would mean so much to me if you were there." Another pause. I could almost hear her mind racing, trying to figure out what I might know, what I might be planning. "And of course," she finally said, "we'll be there." Perfect. That night, David came home from work with flowers again. He'd been doing that a lot lately, bringing me flowers, complimenting my cooking, suggesting romantic date nights. Maybe he was feeling guilty about the affair. Or maybe Rebecca was pushing him to be a better husband to throw off suspicion. "I can't wait for Thanksgiving," he said over dinner. "It's always my favorite holiday. Family, friends, everyone together." "It's going to be especially memorable this year," I agreed. "Oh? Why's that?" I smiled at my husband, this man who had betrayed me in the deepest possible way, who had stolen my child and my life and my truth. "You'll see." Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and gray, with threatening clouds that matched my mood perfectly. I'd been awake since 4 a.m., not from excitement, but from the electric anticipation of someone about to detonate a bomb in their own life. David was up early too, helping with food prep with an enthusiasm that would have been touching if I didn't know it was built on lies. He carved the turkey with precision, whistling softly, occasionally coming up behind me to kiss my neck while I worked on side dishes. "You seem happy today," I observed, watching him arrange the carved meat on the serving platter. "Why wouldn't I be? Beautiful wife, beautiful kids, beautiful home, surrounded by people we love." He gestured around our kitchen, which did look like something from a magazine. "I'm a lucky man, Sarah." The audacity was breathtaking. Even knowing what I knew about him, part of me was impressed by his performance. He really believed he could have it all. The perfect family life with me and the passionate affair with Rebecca. "Yes," I agreed. "You are very lucky. Though I suppose luck can change, can't it?" Something flickered across his face, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "I suppose it can, but some things are built to last." Emma and Jake were both excited about the dinner. Emma had made place cards for everyone, decorating each one with little drawings. Jake had spent the morning arranging and rearranging the centerpiece I'd let him help create. Normal kids doing normal holiday things, blissfully unaware that their world was about to implode. I watched Jake carefully as he worked, and seeing him with new eyes. Now that I knew the truth, the resemblance to Michael was unmistakable. The same gentle demeanor, the same careful attention to detail, even the same way of tilting his head when he was concentrating. How had I never seen it before? More importantly, how had Michael never seen it? The guests started arriving at 2 p.m. My parents first, then David's parents, followed by my sister Katie and her family. David's brother Mark came with his wife and their twin boys. The house filled with noise and laughter and the comfortable chaos of a large family gathering. Michael and Rebecca arrived last, and I could see the tension in Rebecca's face the moment she walked through the door. She dressed carefully. She had an elegant burgundy dress that complemented her dark hair, subtle jewelry, perfect makeup. But her smile was brittle, and she kept glancing around the room like she was looking for exits. Michael, on the other hand, seemed genuinely happy to be there. He hugged me warmly and complimented the house decorations. When he saw Jake arranging the silverware, he knelt down to his level. "You did a beautiful job with the centerpiece, buddy," he said, and Jake beamed with pride. I watched this interaction with my heart breaking. Michael was Jake's real father, and he didn't even know it. Jake was soaking up the attention from this man who was essentially a stranger to him, but who shared his DNA. During cocktail hour, I mingled with our guests, playing the perfect hostess while my mind raced through final preparations. I'd hidden the DNA test results in my bedroom, along with all the evidence of David's affair. I'd also prepared a small gift bag for everyone, a little memento of what would undoubtedly be our last Thanksgiving together. David worked the room like the charming host he'd always been. I watched him shake hands with Michael, compliment my mother's dress, help his father to a comfortable chair. He caught my eye across the room and winked. This man who was betraying his business partner, his wife, his children, everyone who trusted him. Rebecca was nursing a single glass of wine and staying close to the walls. When I approached her in the kitchen, she nearly jumped. "You seem nervous," I said, keeping my voice light and friendly. "Do I? I suppose I'm just tired. It's been a long week." "I'm sure it has. All those late-night phone calls can really wear you out." Her wine glass froze halfway to her lips. "I'm sorry?" "Oh, I just meant work calls. David's been getting them too. You know how demanding clients can be." She nodded, but I could see the calculation in her eyes. She was trying to figure out how much I knew, whether my comment had been innocent or loaded with meaning. At 4 p.m., I called everyone to the dining room. Our long mahogany table looked absolutely perfect, set with my grandmother's china and crystal glasses that caught the light from the chandelier. Everyone found their seats using Emma's place cards, with David at the head of the table and me at the foot, like we had for every holiday dinner in our 15 years of marriage. "Before we eat," I announced, standing up with my wine glass, "I want to say a few words about gratitude and family." The room quieted, faces turning toward me expectantly. David smiled encouragingly. Rebecca's knuckles were white where she gripped her water glass. "This year has been particularly enlightening for me," I began, my voice steady and warm. "I've learned so much about the people in my life, about loyalty, about truth, about the real meaning of family." Murmurs of agreement around the table. My mother dabbed at her eyes. She always got emotional during holiday speeches. "I've also learned that sometimes the most important conversations happen when we're all together, surrounded by the people who matter most. Because truth shared in the light among family has a power that secrets whispered in the dark can never have." David's smile faltered slightly. Rebecca had gone very still. "So before we give thanks for what we have, I want to share something with all of you. Something that will help us understand what family really means." I reached under my chair and pulled out a manila envelope. "David, sweetheart, would you come here for a moment?" He looked confused, but stood up and walked over to me. The room was silent, except for the soft clinking of crystal as someone set down a glass. 15 years ago, we promised to love each other in sickness and in health, for better or worse, for richer or poorer. I opened the envelope and pulled out the first DNA test results. We promised to be honest with each other, to forsake all others, to cherish what we built together. David's face went white as he saw the papers in my hands. But promises, I've learned, are only as strong as the people who make them. I looked around the room, making eye contact with each person. "Rebecca, could you join us, please?" Rebecca's chair scraped against the floor as she stood on unsteady legs. Michael looked between his wife and my husband with growing confusion. "Sarah, what's going on?" David's voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the panic underneath. "I'm giving thanks, darling. Thanks for teaching me that I'm stronger than I ever knew. Thanks for showing me what real betrayal looks like, so I'll never be fooled again." I held up the DNA results. "And thanks for giving me the most precious gift of all, the truth." I turned to face the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet the real parents of Jake Mitchell." The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that dining room. "Sarah, don't do this," Rebecca whispered, but her voice carried in the stillness. "Jake isn't David's son," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "These DNA tests prove that he's actually Michael's child, which means that 9 years ago, while I thought I was happily pregnant with my husband's baby, Rebecca was having an affair with David and got pregnant with Michael's child." The explosion of voices was immediate. My mother gasped. My father started to stand up. David's parents looked like they'd been slapped. Emma stared at me in shock, her mouth open. But the most devastating reaction came from Michael. He looked at Rebecca with such profound hurt and betrayal that I almost felt sorry for her. "Rebecca?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Is this true?" Rebecca was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. "Michael, I can explain." "Is it true?" She nodded, unable to speak. Michael's gaze shifted to Jake, who was looking around the table in confusion, not understanding why all the adults were upset. I saw the moment Michael truly saw him, saw his own features reflected in this boy he'd known as his friend's son. How? Michael's voice was broken. How is this possible? I reached into the envelope again and pulled out more papers. According to the hospital records I've obtained, Rebecca gave birth to a son on August 2nd, 9 years ago. That same night, I gave birth to a son who died within hours due to complications. The room went dead silent again. The official records show that Rebecca's baby died and mine lived. But somehow, the living child went home with me, and I raised him believing he was mine. I looked directly at Rebecca. The question is, did you orchestrate the switch, or did it just happen? Rebecca collapsed back into her chair, sobbing. "He was dying," she whispered. "Your baby was dying, and mine was healthy, and I couldn't bear to lose another child. I'd already had 2 miscarriages. When the nurse stepped out of the room, I switched the hospital bracelets. I told myself I was saving him, giving him to a mother who could love him." The confession hit the room like a physical blow. My sister Katie made a sound like she'd been punched. David's brother Mark was staring at Rebecca like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "You stole my child," Michael said, his voice deadly quiet. "You let me grieve for a son who was alive, and you gave him to another family. And you," I turned to David, who looked like he was about to vomit, "you knew, didn't you? You knew Jake wasn't your biological son." David's silence was answer enough. "You've known for 9 years that the boy calling you daddy was actually your business partner's child, your affair partner's child, and you said nothing. Sarah, please," David finally found his voice. "Let's discuss this privately. The children deserve the truth." My voice rose for the first time. Jake deserves to know who his real father is. Emma deserves to know that her brother isn't really her brother. And everyone in this room deserves to know what kind of people you and Rebecca really are. I pulled out more papers. Credit card receipts showing thousands of dollars spent on Rebecca, hotel receipts from your romantic getaways, photos of you two together at that park where you thought no one would see you. I scattered the evidence across the white tablecloth like playing cards. Your affair has been going on for years, not just the original affair that created Jake, but an ongoing relationship that never ended. You've been lying to me, to Michael, to our children, to everyone for nearly a decade. Rebecca was hyperventilating now. Michael had his head in his hands. David was still standing frozen beside me, looking like a man watching his entire life crumble in real time. "But the real betrayal," I continued, my voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more power than shouting, "isn't just the affair. It's not even stealing my biological child and replacing him with yours. It's the fact that you let me love Jake with my whole heart, knowing that someday this truth would come out and destroy him." I looked around the table at my family, at people who had loved and trusted David and Rebecca for years. Jake is 8 years old. He calls David daddy. He thinks Michael is just a family friend. When he learns the truth, and he will learn it because I won't build my life on lies the way you have, it will shatter his world. Not because there's anything wrong with who his real parents are, but because the people who were supposed to protect him chose deception instead. I sat back down, suddenly exhausted. So yes, let's give thanks. Thanks that the truth finally came out. Thanks that Jake will grow up knowing who he really is. Thanks that Michael can finally know his son. And thanks that I'll never have to pretend to be friends with people who betrayed me so completely. The aftermath was chaos. My parents immediately started crying. David's parents demanded explanations. Emma ran from the room, and I heard her bedroom door slam. Jake started crying because everyone else was upset, even though he didn't understand why. But through it all, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. The truth was finally out. The lies were finally over. Whatever happened next, at least it would be built on reality instead of deception. David tried to approach me, his face pleading. "Sarah, we need to talk. There are things you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, standing up and facing him one last time as his wife. "I understand that our marriage is over. I understand that you've been living a double life for years. And I understand that after today, you'll have to live with the consequences of your choices." I looked around the destroyed dining room, at the beautiful meal that would go uneaten, at the family that would never be the same. "Dinner is canceled," I announced, "but the truth has been served." As our guests filed out in shocked silence, I realized that this wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the end of an entire way of life, built on lies and betrayal and willful blindness. But it was also a beginning, a chance to rebuild on honest ground with people who deserved my trust in a life where truth mattered more than appearances. The real question was, could Michael and I figure out how to co-parent Jake while we both healed from this devastating betrayal? Could Jake eventually understand and forgive the lies that had shaped his young life? And could any of us ever truly recover from the destruction of everything we thought we knew about family, loyalty, and love? As I watched David and Rebecca leave my house together, because of course they left together, I realized that some questions don't have answers. Some betrayals are so complete that they change the very fabric of who you are. But sometimes that change is exactly what you need to become who you were always meant to be. The truth had set me free. Now I had to figure out what to do with that freedom.